Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or IHearOfSherlock.substack.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 304, Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now, here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder.
Well, thank you, Bill Curtis. It's a pleasure to be here once again. This is Scott Monty from I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm also Bert Wolder from the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees. How are you, Scott?
Thank goodness. Oh,
Thank goodness.
We build this little empire of ours brick by brick.
Brick by brick, yes. And soon we'll be colonizing and taking over smaller podcasts and showing them the right way to manage and to do things.
Oh, I was hoping to just kind of do the cask of Amontillado and keep us solitary and confined in this little alcove here.
What's the national liqueur of Denmark? I think we should be looking at, because look, Denmark, has been really vulnerable ever since Shakespeare. I mean, look what happened to all those kings, and so, to be or not to be. I mean, let's cut to the chase. We have the answer.
The answer is aquavit.
Aquavitae. No, the aquavitae is what kept Fu Manchu alive.
Water of life, as it should be.
Slanjavach.
Well, we want to keep our listeners alive here and paying attention. So we have a lovely show for you today. It's comprised of a number of things, including, of course, an interview with Joel Meadows from Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders, the Gene Genie. We'll be talking about his graphic novel approach there and the history of how he's gotten here, including other publications and Tripwire. It's a fantastic online resource and magazine. So stay tuned for that. We also have, what do we have? The canonical couplet quiz. We have a copy of Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders available for you if you participate in our quiz. We also have the lovely Madeline Quinones, who is back with another installment of A Chance of Listening, where she highlights some Sherlockian podcast and tells us why it is worth listening and what they do. And then finally, we are going to talk about what we saw and perhaps participated in at the Baker Street Irregulars weekend earlier this month in New York City. All that and more is just ahead. Just a reminder, you can support the show on Patreon or Substack for as little as $1 a month. Those contributions give you the right to listen to the show ad-free, so you don't have to worry about slowing down in your effort to consume more content about Sherlock Holmes any way you can. Your contributions help us to do the research, quiz prizes together, all kinds of things that go into hosting a quality program like this. So just get over to patreon.com/iHearOfSherlock and iHearOfSherlock.substack.com. We also have communities there where we have commentaries and other bonus content for our community as you participate. So check it out, see what works for you. Well, Bert, are you fully recovered after the BSI weekend?
Fully recovered. No, that will.
Oh,
that will. But I like the glow. I like the glow to last. It was a terrific weekend. You know, I live much closer to New York City than you do, and many of the other hundreds of people who came to New York City for the Baker Street Irregulars weekend. But I knew that I was on my way to a special experience when I was driven into Manhattan by Oscar, who was an Uber driver, who was an aspiring actor, a videographer, and a podcaster. And we just spent the whole drive talking about podcasts and video and Sherlock Holmes. And from the moment I left my house, I knew it was going to be a special couple of days.
And was it?
Yeah. Well, as soon as I got in, as soon as you get into the city, because I got in on the Wednesday, you immediately bump into people, and it's just wonderful. And that is, if you want to sum up the whole weekend, it's just seeing, people that I've known for a very long time, and many people I've just met within the last couple of months or years. But I bumped into, Rosemary Herbert and my pal Michael Barton, and I remember Peter, and this was just in Peter Blau in the first couple of minutes, and Monica Schmidt and Madeline, just in the first maybe 30 seconds of arriving in New York.
Yeah, and that's really what this is all about. We talk about the world of Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, and it's this coming together that really makes a difference. And it doesn't matter who the names are. They're going to be different for everyone who's listening to this show, but it's about sharing this and having that common bond. And particularly when we go to something like the BSI weekend, there are familiar sights, things that we've been doing year after year. And there are also new additions. There was a wonderful exhibit at the Grolier Club. And I know you went to see this, Bert, but the way you came back so excited about having seen this exhibit it was infectious. Why don't you tell our listeners about what was going on at the Grolier Club this year?
It's the Grolier Club is a private club for book lovers. It's in a little bit north of where the Baker Street Irregulars kind of gather in New York, but very easy to get to. And I walked up there, and the Grolier Club, though, is open to the public, even though it's a private club, and you can see all sorts of things. So you just walk in, there's no fee. And they had an exhibition, 2 exhibitions actually. But the one that really stuck with me, as you say, is the exhibition on imaginary books. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And the good news is, folks, you can see a lot of the exhibition online on the Grolier Club website. And what it is, it's curated by a fellow named Reed Byers, who I happened to bump into. He wasn't injured at the club, but he, explained a good deal of it. And what he's done is collect over 100, I think, examples. He's created these things, working with artists and craftspeople, of books, imaginary books that don't really exist but are mentioned in fiction of all sorts. So on the one hand, if you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, you will have read about the actual Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a device, and this is something Adams dreamed up in the years before Kindles and so on existed. But it's there, along with Arthur Dent's towel. If you're a fan of Doctor Who, you know about Rassilon. Well, he's got a book there with an appropriate description of the laws of Gallifrey by Rassilon, so you can see that. And these things look absolutely authentic. So on the one hand, you have these modern things. On the other hand, one of the great lacks of the classical era is that there isn't more of the writing, as an example of Aristotle, that survived. What about Aristotle on comedy? Oh, if only we could have read that. Well, it's there. He's produced. You know what? Now, there's nothing really inside these things, as I understand. But everything from a Sherlockian standpoint, the issue of the Strand magazine featuring the giant rat of Sumatra is on display. Holmes's monograph of the polyphonic motets of Lassus. The books in the Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy Sayers, written by Harriet Vane. It's just remarkable, and it's just a lot of fun and very whimsical.
It is. And just for our supporters, our Patreon and Substack supporters, we have exclusive photos of some of these books, these fake, rare, imaginary books. So if you'd like to have a glimpse at those, just make sure that you join us as a member. Now, we don't want to go through the whole weekend and bore you line item by line item, or even the BSI dinner and bore you with all of that. But it is worthy of note. A couple of things. One of our former guests here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere was given an investiture, Rosemary Herbert, with whom we spoke on episode 173 about her famous crashing of the dinner of the Speckled Band of Boston back in the mid-1970s when they were still all male. She assumed male costume and inveigled her way into the band. And she was given the investiture, A Slim Youth in an Ulster. Maybe worth going back and listening to her talk with us about that and just learn a little bit about Rosemary as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is of the papers that were given, we're going to try to bring one of the speakers to our other podcast, to Trifles, to talk about Pinkertons. And that is Ross Davies, who really gave a nice expose about the Pinkerton Detective Agency and their connections both in America and over in the UK. I don't want to give away the game, but Ross is a delightful speaker, and that was one that particularly stood out to me.
Now you got to tell Ross.
Yeah, he'll be surprised. Since you are a listener of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, we can be fairly certain that you enjoy audio. And if you enjoy audio as it relates to Sherlock Holmes, then guess what? You are in luck. Our friends at MX Publishing have over 390 books that are available on Audible as part of the MX Publishing platform. And we here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere have a code to share with you that you can claim for 5 free audiobooks. All you have to do is follow the link in the show notes under our sponsorship section. Click on that link, and it'll take you to a form that you can fill out to claim your 5 titles. You can look through the full list of Audible titles from MX Publishing so you can see what you are getting. There are titles there like The Selected Cases of Dr. Watson by Martin Daly, narrated by Kevin Green. The Further Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes by Caden Cooper Miles, narrated by Luke Barton, who you may remember appeared here on an episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. And The Recollections of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Hall, narrated by Michael Langan. Again, there are over 390 titles to choose from. Put in the 5 that you like in that form, and you will get an email describing what you need to do to claim your free codes. We hope you appreciate this free offer from MX Publishing, our longtime sponsor and friend of the program. Be sure to visit their entire website at mxpublishing.com. Joel Meadows has been editor-in-chief of Tripwire since 1992. He's also a very experienced journalist. who's written about comics, film, and genre for publications like Time Magazine, The Times, Independent on Sunday, The Guardian, Big Issue in the North, SFX, Comic Heroes, and Variety. Joel is a photographer who mainly shoots portraits of creative people. He's produced a number of photography books. On top of that, he was the co-author of Studio Space, a book which looked at the way 20 of the world's best comic artists and illustrators work, including Mike Mignola, Walt Simonson, Frank Miller, Dave Gibbons, and more. In 2019, Joel wrote Masters of Comics, another book which covered comic artists and their workspaces. Joel Meadows, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you for having me on.
It is a treat. So let's begin at your very beginning with Sherlock Holmes. How did you first meet this iconic character?
Well, I guess I was quite young. I was in my sort of late teens, and I started to watch sort of TV and film with the characters. So I remember seeing the Jeremy Brett, The Return of Sherlock Holmes on ITV, and I admit I saw the young Sherlock Holmes slightly later when it was on television, sort of many years later. But I encountered Holmes in my sort of teens, and as the years progressed, I would watch film and TV and read Holmes stories, and it just, the character just really engaged with me for many years now.
You mentioned The Return, so you would have come in during the Edward Hardwicke era?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you go back and see the earlier ones with David Burke?
Yes, actually, I have seen some of those. I mean, I admit I probably have a preference for Hardwicke, but that might just have been because I saw those the first time around. So,
yeah, we always remember our first.
Well, exactly.
Joel, when did you read the stories, or when did you get to Conan Doyle?
It was a little bit later. I think it was from my 20s, so it would have been later on. And I read the classic. So, I dipped in and read the more famous sort of Doyle stories, but then I tried to sort of fill in the gaps. I mean, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge. I do have a few gaps, but I definitely read them in my 20s. And I mean, the comic goes back to the sort of early 2000s, and we developed the comic, and we didn't get any interest from the two publishers we pitched it to, and then we put it down, and then we picked it up again because the website, which is also a magazine that we run, a Tripwire, we do a thing called Lost Tales, and then my writer Scott Braden said, "Have you got any comic projects that never saw the light of day?" So I said I thought that the Holmes project would be perfect, and having discussed it after a sort of 15-year gap, I thought, maybe I should give it another go. Huh. And then we went back and we tested the waters with 3 shorts, which were very well received in our magazine. And then we decided to jump in and publish what is now a 2-part sort of graphic novel story, basically, with the second part coming sort of later this year.
Mm. Mm-hmm. So that first time around, when the publishers were reticent about your material, was it something specific with your project? Was it that we were, say, in between different resurgences of Holmes? What do you think it...
I don't know. It is possible. I also hadn't done... Because I've worked as a journalist for many years, and I wasn't quite as established at that point. I mean, admittedly, we are publishing it ourselves, but... It could be a number of different factors. It might, as you say, have been between, because, there's always interest in Holmes, but maybe in sort of 2001 when we pitched it, maybe it was one of those periods when it was sort of a fallow period for interest in Holmes at the time.
Mm. And you mentioned Tripwire and the Lost Tales series. What other maybe characters or genres have been part of that?
Well, as I said, our writer Scott Braden has covered everything from kind of Batman to, he's written sort of 25 or 30 of these. So these are sort of like series that were mooted but never came to fruition. So there's a lot. There's at least sort of 20 to 30 different series that never saw the light of day. So there's things like a Green Lantern series and a Batman and a Daredevil. So there's a range of them which are available on our website. We also run them in our magazine from time to time as well. So it was just, but as I said, just sort of re-examining the series made me think that maybe it was time to give it another go.
Yeah.
after such a long break, with a sort of fresh pair of eyes 15 years later.
Joel, we've got listeners, from all around the world who are interested in graphic novels and many other things. For
Yes.
those folks who don't know, can you just talk a little bit about Tripwire? Because I know Tripwire, you position Tripwire as the genre magazine, and
Yes.
you've been editor-in-chief for a very long time.
Yes.
And Tripwire talks about graphic novels and TV and film and genre and all sorts of things. Can you just, for the folks who might not know what that is, can you talk a little bit about it, and especially how you got into all of this?
Yes, with pleasure. It started life as a fairly basic fanzine that I did with an ex-neighbour of mine back in 1992. And it originally had comics and music, and then we sort of party company, and then we brought in sort of TV and film and art. So we ran a print magazine from 1992 to 2003. We took a slight break, went back in 2007, took another slight break in sort of 2011. And then we went back in 2020 because I missed having a print magazine. And we also started the website in 2015. So, yeah, as you rightly say, we cover comics, film, TV, art and illustration. So it's interviews with creators, reviews of the titles and putting things into historical context as well. It has changed. It's become a lot more, the production values have become a lot more sophisticated over the last few years. I mean, I designed it myself. It's a 100-page full-color magazine now that we do sort of 3 times a year. So we interview comic people, we also interview illustrators, people like Robert McGuinness, who did the Diamonds Are Forever poster and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and a guy called Phil Hale, who's done loads of sort of Stephen King books, and he's also an artist, painter, and an illustrator. So our range of interest is quite broad, because I like to think the people who like comics, they like illustration as well, and obviously film and TV. Over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a greater connection between that and comics. So it was a no-brainer, really, to cover both.
How many writers do you have working with you on the magazine?
We have sort of 3 or 4, but we have a few others that we use occasionally as well. I design and I edit it. We have my friend Scott Braden who writes for us, and Stephen Dalton used to write for NME. Who's also written for The Guardian. He does TV and film stuff for us. And my sort of second in command, Andy Coleman, sort of the senior editor, and he writes stuff for us. The last issue that we put out, which came out last week, we had a big history of Daredevil because it's 60 years of the characters. He wrote a history of the character, and I did some interviews with certain writers who've worked on the book. So we have between sort of 3 and 6 writers who sort of. And we also have a strip section at the back, which we've used to preview homes. I mean, it's a wonderful vehicle to run strip content and also to give people a flavour of the Sherlock Holmes thing, which, as I said, is we started running it in the magazine. I wrote 3 shorts before I started the script for the longer story, and I think it's great training ground because just like going back to comics, people who worked on 2000 AD over here, you can really hone your skills on a 6 or an 8-page comic story because there's no flab. You can't mess around. There can't be any padding. You have to really cut to the chase, basically.
Yeah, well, that is really impressive. Anytime these days someone can still pull off print, we're impressed.
Well, thank you. I've worked as a journalist as well on things like newspapers and magazines, places like the Times and the Sunday Times and Time Magazine and another place. I like having the website is fine. I'm not disparaging our website because obviously it serves a purpose, but there's something about having a physical print object in your hand that it's hard to beat.
Yes, it's interesting because back on episode 206, we spoke with Adrian Brady, who,
of course, the editor of the Sherlock Holmes magazine. I am
there you
familiar.
Go.
I've written a piece for them, and I'm pitching another piece, which I think he might take up about the graphic novel. It's a wonderful magazine. I think he does a phenomenal job.
Oh, it really is. It's very impressive. And again, he, like you, came from a journalism background, and I was going to say that if the two of you didn't know each other, I was going to suggest
yes, well, thank you.
connecting.
Yeah, no, I am familiar with him, and as I said, he does great work.
Perfect.
It's a wonderful magazine for fans of Holmes, and I'd recommend it.
When our worlds collide.
And if any of your listeners haven't seen the magazine, it's well recommended.
Yes, it is.
So, Joel, is this project something? I mean, you mentioned you've been working on this for a long time. Is this something that you and Andy have been working on together for a long time, or when did Andy come in?
I mean, basically, I had another artist on board, which didn't quite work out for a number of different reasons. And I was recommended to Andy from a mutual friend. And we just got chatting, and we created an 8-page short in our proposal, which looks quite sort of primitive now, and it doesn't quite work. But it's an interesting artifact to look at, considering sort of the history of the series. And then basically, round about, let me get this right, about 15, it's about 2017 or 18, I started to think about what we could do, how we could get people into the world, how we could get readers interested into the world that I've created, with Andy. And so the 3 shorts are, one deals with Holmes returning to Baker Street, because one of the MacGuffins of this story is that Holmes has lost the house. I mean, basically, he lost the house because he didn't. The other thing about this story is it does blur into reality, and the reason why he lost the house is because he didn't solve the Jack the Ripper murders, and so his reputation was basically not what it was, and so people stopped hiring him as a detective, and so he loses the house, and so he's had to move somewhere else, and so the first story is about returning to Baker Street to pick up an object. And then the other 2 stories, one is a chase between a new character I've created, who's this Gurkha agent who figures quite prominently in the comic. So he's chasing his victim. And then the third story is because I've got Oswald Mosley, who was the well-known sort of right-wing sort of British neo-Nazi, and he's basically the prime minister in this story. So the third story is the secret files of Oswald Mosley, which is basically him looking, sort of cursing people like Holmes and his compatriots. But I really enjoyed doing those, and they fitted well, and I just thought it was time to jump in and do the longer story.
Well, I mean, it's brilliant. What you've brought together here. Holmes, the impact of not solving the Ripper murders, going back to Baker Street, a chase, Oswald Mosley, and I don't think we're giving.
It also has stuff to do with the unraveling of the DNA helix, because you might be aware of this because of Watson and Crick, who were the 2 scientists who unravelled. So it just seemed like a fortuitous, occasion. It just seemed like synchronicity, I guess, is the word, that we can have. It's a different Watson, but it seems to work well, and it's the DNA. I'm not a scientist, and my knowledge of science is quite limited, but it just seemed to be. It seemed to fit in really nicely, because it was such a major thing in sort of 20th century history, and as they're blurring the lines between the fictional world that Holmes inhabits and having real life figures, it lends it an extra sort of tone that other Holmes stories don't, I like to think.
Well, yes, absolutely, and with the title, this is volume 1. This is the Gene Genie. And so we're not giving away any spoilers by talking about DNA. But one of the things I was many delighted things to see in this is Rosamund Franklin. You've put Rosamund Franklin.
Again, I wanted to ground it in reality. I wanted to have a prominent female. She doesn't have a major role, but I talked to a friend of mine who's written about science, who I work with at Guinness World Records, and I said, who would you pick as a prominent real life female scientist who had a pivotal role? Admittedly, this is slightly earlier than when she was actually in real history, but this is a fictional story, so I'm playing a little fast and loose with some of the facts anyway. I mean, it wasn't Dr. Watson, obviously, who unraveled the DNA. It was the other Watson, and I just thought it would be fun to have her in there. So,
well, and to me, that is where something like this and similar things. I mean, we saw Nicholas Meyer do this with the 7% solution, bringing Sigmund Freud.
I've been trying to arrange an interview with him, which hasn't quite happened for a number of different reasons, and also he's in LA, so obviously because of the horrible things with the fires, it's not quite the right time at the moment. But I'm hoping to pick that up.
We saw him over the weekend, so if there's any way we can help, put you in touch with him and make.
I would love to talk to him about his Holmes career, because he's had a phenomenal career writing Holmes books, and I have read 7% Solution. I keep meaning to pick up the others because he's a great writer, and again, just like our story, he uses people like Freud and real historical figures, because I think it just gives it a very different flavor. It grounds it in reality, but it makes it fantastical at the same time.
Well, that's just it. That was what I was going to ask you about. Is taking reality and morphing that into this other world, a world that ostensibly started in the fictional realm, but Conan Doyle was
Yes.
so convincing at the time. People thought that Sherlock Holmes walked among them. So,
I know.
talk to us a little bit about the challenges looking at this from a historical perspective, and how you're able to draw these threads together so convincingly.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, it's very easy to fall into a rabbit hole with research, because we are. I think the difficult thing is, before this started, I didn't have any structure to play with, and the thing about this is that you could because I've set my own parameters. There's basically you can have anything. You could think about what happened during these periods, and you can think, you could draw on anything at all. But I thought Mosley was a good figure because he was a rather infamous figure, and and the second book has got George V in it as well. Because I wanted to touch on the royal family, and I remember when the Pennyworth series, which spun off out of the Batman
Yes.
that HBO did, which was kind of what happened if Pennyworth occupied a slightly different space. So in this, it's almost like taking a step off the pavement and going in a slightly different direction to what happened in reality. So with this as well, Second World War it's not likely to happen in this world. There was the First World War, but there's that period where everything changed. And even things like the church, I think it's called Whitefriars, there's a church near St. Paul's, which was bombed during the Second World War, but at this point, it's slightly earlier, so it's intact. So the artist had to have a look at some old illustrations of the church to basically draw it as if it was, intact. But it has been fascinating to go in and, it's tough because it's a home story, but there are a hell of a lot of supporting characters. So my worry was people are going to go, oh, this isn't really a home story because you've got the Gurkha agent, you've got Watson, you've got Watson's son in the second book, you've got 5 or 6 characters. Got Franklin Miller, who is the Mohawk, because the Mohawks were a Regency gang in London in the 18th century, who caused all manner of havoc, basically. And I thought he'd be an interesting character to include into the mix.
Yes. So talk to us a little bit about the Kickstarter project here, because what I can tell by looking at it is we are anticipating volume 2 at some point throughout this year. But how have you set things up, and how can people get involved?
Well, basically, we did our first campaign through another platform called Zoop, which is just purely comics. But I decided to do this one on Kickstarter because there are more eyes, and it's not a criticism of Zoop, because they were very helpful, and it was a great crowdfunding platform. But we did the first book. It was originally going to be a single volume, but there was just so much plot that I said to the artist, I'd like to split this. So the first volume did really well. So the second volume will be out sort of around about May or June time. So it's going to be around about 96 pages of story. And there's going to be lots of extra material like character sketches. They're going to be some of my script pages. We've commissioned some original pieces as well, some pin-ups from some certain artists. So we've got 2 different covers for the second book, like we did with the first one. We've got pin-ups from a guy called Tom Coker, who's worked with sort of DC and Image, a guy called George Pratt, who's an amazing painter, who used to be a traditional comic artist, but he now teaches illustration down at the Ringling School in Florida. So yeah, it's on Kickstarter at the moment. We've extended, the campaign ends on the 13th of December, but Kickstarter have introduced a thing called late pledges, which means that people can continue to support it until the people who run the campaign decide to stop it. So it's currently available. We've got just under a month left. People can still grab the book. There's 2 incredible covers, from a guy called Dan Panosian, who's an American comic artist who's worked for DC and Marvel, and everybody's done covers for Conan. And these are original. Another British artist called Fraser Irving, who's been around for years, worked at 2000 AD and Batman. And the nice thing about this, we're also offering paperbacks. So we have a recap in the second book, but if people want to read the first book, we're making it available in paperback for the first time, and we're doing a new printing of the hardback of the first volume. We're offering this in paperback too. So there's a lot of options, and there's also a digital. So if people don't want a hardback, if they just want the book, there's a more reasonable way of picking it up.
Yeah, there literally is something for everyone.
Well, I'd like to think so. I would like to think so.
Yeah. This is marvelous.
Yeah. Joe,
and I've enjoyed it because it's, the moving from journalism to writing was a bit daunting, but it's been very satisfying.
Joel, you talk about moving from journalism to writing. What was your entry point as a young person into this? What were the first comics that you looked at? When did
Well, I
this
mean,
really imprint itself on you?
yeah. I mean, basically, I blame my brother for this because he had a friend who was in hospital, and he was reading loads of comics, sort of Superman comics and things, and so he got my brother into it, and my brother got me into it. So I read things like New Teen Titans and Superman and DC Comics Presents, but I also read Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck, which is a very strange, very surreal comic when I was about 8 or 9 years old, which is a heavily satirical comic. So I was quite young when I got into comics. And also because you can get them here, but they're not quite as easy to get as they're easy now. But when I was a kid, they were harder to get than they are in the States. So you really had to hunt them down over here.
Marvelous. So it must be wonderful to be wrapping this project up. What's next on your horizon?
Well, actually, I'm planning a novella which bridges the gap between basically the canon of Doyle's stories and the first graphic novel. So basically, Holmes, as I said, Holmes lost the house in Baker Street, and so that the novella deals with him living homeless on the streets. So Holmes is homeless. And so his reputation is sort of in tatters, and he's trying to find that case that will get him sort of back on his feet. So that's a sort of 150 odd page prose novella, which I'm going to be launching next, basically probably on Kickstarter as well. And I'm actually thinking about a third comic project as well, which will be a second actually, because this is obviously a two-parter. So, which will be featuring a prominent adversary of Holmes, but not Moriarty, another prominent adversary of Holmes, who I won't mention by name because I like to keep a little bit of a secret under wraps.
Okay, that's fair
For the
enough.
moment, but it's a character I think is very interesting, who would fit in very well with the world that we've created here.
So as you are looking to spec out that novella and get it ready for publication, I hope you're going to call it Sherlock Homeless.
Well, actually, it's going to be called Down and Out in London.
That's fair
Actually,
enough.
which
There
is
it
a
is.
nod, obviously, to Mr. Orwell, which I thought that would be appropriate.
Yes.
But no, I'm looking forward to getting into it. I mean, it is daunting, they're standing on the shoulders of giants. Obviously, Doyle was a great writer, and he created this wonderfully rich world, which is much loved by people around the world. Yeah. So I was a little bit daunted, but because I've already written a volume already, and I feel like I'm getting a good feel as to what our take is. It's a different take. It isn't strictly speaking a detective story. I mean, the second book might well be more of a detective story, and actually the novella might be more of a detective story. But this is the comic as it stands at the moment is more of a kind of sci-fi steampunk adventure, basically. So it's what happens if Holmes is in a world that he doesn't really fit in. With a man who is this kind of monstrous figure, ruling the country, and he has to use all of his wits, and he's not physically as strong as he was because he's an older man now. So he has to rely on the skills of others to assist him.
Talk to us a little bit about the difference from your perspective in creating a novella versus working on a graphic novel.
Well, obviously it's different. I mean, it's all down to me because it's prose. The comic is very much, Andy Bennett's efforts are monumental, and without his incredible art, it wouldn't have any of the impact. With this, it's all down to me. If it stands or falls on the quality of my writing, and also the structure and the plot. So, it's a slightly different beast. It has to be an enjoyable story. And I wanted to tap into some of the things. I want to answer some of the questions that have been thrown up by, the graphic novels that people have read to fill in the gaps. And I've written a little bit of prose. I mean, there's in the first graphic novel, there's a short which focused on one of the characters, which I really enjoyed. It was just a 2,000 word prose short, and I kind of feel like I'm ready to write something a little bit longer. And I'm looking forward to really get. I haven't properly started it because I'm still working through the graphic novel, but I'm very good at multitasking. So, but no, it's a different beast. But I'd like to think that it's hopefully enjoyable in its own way as the comic. And it
Certainly.
fits in, and hopefully it will, as I said, fill in the gaps. And people who enjoyed the comic will hopefully enjoy the prose story as well, because it's a similar approach. I mean, the slightly kind of crotchety Holmes that I have created is going to be very much in evidence here, but he's going to be very much on the back foot. He's not going to have he's living in an environment that he's not comfortable in, and his reputation is not what it was, so he has to readjust to a slightly different lifestyle.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've got bitten by the bug.
Oh, I have. I've always been a huge fan. And the other thing about the character is, just like James Bond, just like Batman, just like Scarlet Pimpernel, these are all characters that are iconic, but they are flexible enough that there are so many different takes that people can, so many different approaches that people can take to put their own spin on these creations, and that's what's so wonderful. They're such rich characters.
Yeah. You ever consider taking them out of their timeline or out of their usual geography, or is Sherlock Holmes in London in late Victorian era just where you want to see him?
Well, I mean, he's obviously an Edwardian in this story, or fictional Edwardian, but possibly. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, I guess it could work in another setting. I wouldn't say no, but at the moment, I'm just focusing my attention because I feel like he does fit that better. I mean, obviously there have been, there's been loads of films and TV where they take him out, and the fish out of water thing does work well. But as I said, I wouldn't say never, but not currently.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. So where other than Tripwire or Kickstarter, which we will have links to these in the show notes, is there any other place where people can follow you or find you or the team?
Well, I mean, I am on the various social media platforms. I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Twitter, and we have a Facebook. We have a Sherlock Holmes Empire Builders group on Facebook. We also have a Tripwire group also on Facebook. So if people search, for me by name, they should find me on the various social media platforms.
Okay. Well, we will make sure that we get those in the show notes as
Great, thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Well, Joel Meadows, any last minute words of wisdom, encouragement, etc. for all the listeners out there?
Well, I mean, we've managed to accumulate a lot of incredible quotes from people about Holmes, and I think I would be remiss if I didn't at least share a couple. So I'm going to. So the first one is from Ian Rankin, creator of Rebus. Classic Sherlock Holmes. You can smell the chimney smoke and feel the clatter of hooves. Here's the character we all know and love, given a fresh polish for the 21st century. So and I'm very, very proud. Obviously, that's incredible. I mean, and I have from Guillermo del Toro, who described it as a darn good romp. So we've got we've got a lot of love for this book. And then from Michael Moorcock, fantasy legend, when you think there is nothing more to be said or done with Sherlock Holmes, along comes Meadows and Bennett to breathe fresh life into the great detective. Bravo, I'm thoroughly enjoying this original tale. And I might give you one more quote from Jeff Loeb, who's worked on television, but also in comics on Batman, The Long Halloween and The Last Halloween. The game is indeed afoot. It's no small feat to take on the works of Conan Doyle, and yet Joel and Andy have done a neat job of it. Holmes feels quite like the Sherlock we know and love, except he's found himself out of his element. Meanwhile, like every great heroic story, there's a villain who, well, you just have to read it for yourself. Gorgeous artwork by Andy that captures the mood and spirit of Joel's page-turner. Enjoy it all. So yes, I think that's a few little snippets for people to consider. But I'd like to think that if we manage to attract that sort of caliber of fans, I'd like to think that some of your listeners, it will definitely appeal to some of them.
Excellent. Well, Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders, the Gene Genie by Joel Meadows and Andy Bennett. Look for it on Kickstarter, and certainly check out everything that Tripwire has to offer. Maybe even subscribe to their print magazine, whatever floats your boat, as they say. Joel, thank you so much for joining us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show. Thank you very much.
terrific idea, and what he's put together here. But the two things that really stand out to me is, first of all, the enthusiasm from Guillermo del Toro. I mean, it's not every project like this that gets a rave from an Oscar-winning director and filmmaker. But also the story, Watson leaves Holmes to help Francis Crick unravel the DNA helix and finds himself working for the most evil man in England. I mean, it's just terrific, and it's great to hear his enthusiasm for this and the evolution of it, the novella to come. It's really something.
Yeah, it really is. And, as much as we've had other graphic novel artists and writers on the show, or that we say feature regularly, and, of course, we talked to Joanna Draper Carlson from Sherlock Holmes Comics.com. There doesn't seem to be any two projects like this that are the same. They all have a unique angle on them, certainly unique art. And I love the way that Joel talked about the different Kickstarter tiers and selections. There is literally something for everyone in these kinds of offerings. Now, before we launch into A Chance of Listening this time, I owe, both our listeners and Madeline an apology. It seems that in my rush to get to New York, I grabbed the wrong file and dropped it into the last episode. So you had a repeat of the previous Chance of Listening with Madeline, when she had gone to such great lengths to prepare her correspondence with us and to prepare this episode so it would meld perfectly with the goings-on at the BSI weekend. So, Madeline, I'm sorry that the timing doesn't work out here, but it's still just as charming, so we'd like to give you a chance. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quinones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madeline Quinones, and live from New York, it's Ash Wednesday. Sorry, I've always wanted to do that. Okay, I am live in New York when this episode will drop, but it's not live. I can imagine that would be a tricky iHost episode to pull off. I am instead coming to you from the past to tell you about a wonderful little podcast called Talk About Sherlock. Talk About Sherlock is a solo venture by Swedish Sherlockian scholar Matthias Boström. Now, if you're familiar with Matthias's work, you know he is always intelligent, thoughtful, and charming, and he always has something interesting to say. So, of course, his podcast is no different. Each episode is no longer than half an hour, and unfortunately, there are only 8 episodes. One can only imagine that editing a certain book series got in the way of podcasting. Each episode dives into a different Sherlockian or Doylean topic or moment. The very first episode is an account of how the entertainment media might have hurt the chances of the 2018 film Holmes and Watson. Yes, the Will Ferrell movie. Do not skip this episode. Matthias does a deep dive into the online articles covering the film's box office performance, and then presents what I think is a compelling argument for why even a movie like Holmes and Watson is important in the grand scheme of things. So that is actually my episode recommendation. Start with the first episode, and heck, listen to the whole thing. Like I said, it's 8 episodes. It's under 4 hours of audio content, so it's really easy to get through. And a pleasure to listen to. And that's all I've got for this BSI weekend at the moment. See y'all around Manhattan.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, I'm sorry we missed that the last time around, but it's just as charming either way. And I suppose we won't be seeing you around Manhattan currently, Madeline, unless you've made it back east.
Yeah, how interesting. A reference to Holmes and Watson with Will Ferrell. Well, I think she really frames that up very well.
And speaking of Holmes and Watson, you will want to check out the bonus content for this episode, our news of this month. It's a new feature that we have just for our supporters. We're going to give you a few minutes of Sherlockian news that you can use, and hopefully it's something that will catch on. So check that out over on Patreon or Substack. Okay, it's time for everyone's favorite quiz show. It's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to identify the Sherlock Holmes story that we are talking about. The last time around these parts, we left you with this clue. A jealous wife, whose charms were on the wane, endowed her rival with the brand of Cain. Oh, Bert, do you know?
Yes.
Do you know which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about?
Of course. That's the case where a great U.S. senator who's made a lot of money mining gold takes his beautiful governess. He's fallen in love with this beautiful woman, and he takes her to a murderous dentist. And that's the case Watson called The Problem of the Sore Bridge.
Oy, oy, oy. I saw that one coming, and I still couldn't dodge that bullet. Much like Maria Gibson. Okay, well, yeah, bang. Hey, you know, I've been reading the book by Frank Case, Tales of a Wayward Inn.
Oh, great.
Frank Case was, of course, the owner of the Algonquin Hotel, where we used to have, where we used to stay during the BSI weekend. And he realized, and I can't remember who gave him this idea. It was somebody that was in the restaurant there who wanted to tell a joke about a gun. And he said, bang. Oh, that sounds like a gun. Speaking of guns. And he would launch into his joke. So there are numerous instances in various chapters where Case says, bang. Oh, that sounds like a gun. And then he's off to a new topic. He uses that as a paragraph break of sorts.
It's a charming book. I'm so glad you're reading it.
It really is. I'm really enjoying it. But in that case, we would like to turn our attention to Eric Deckers, who gave us his usual contribution. Eureka! I've solved it, probably. It's the story of the time when Watson, who was between wives at the time, engaged in a torrid love affair with a housewife in Iowa, even while Holmes was trying to clear a local babysitter of murder. It's the story Watson called The Problem of the Bridges of Madison County. Although that's a pretty big stretch, even for me. So it's more likely The Problem of Thor Bridge. There you go, Eric. You finally came around to it. That is correct. Well, we have a number of people who also joined you in that answer, so we're going to bring out the prize wheel and give it a spin. It goes around and lands on number 82. 82, that's a high one. And that looks like it's... Oh, well, would you look at that? It's Eric Deckers himself.
Yay!
Eric, congratulations. We have a copy of The Serpent Under, Bonnie McBird's latest Sherlock Holmes book, coming to you. So thank you for that. Well, this time around, we have another canonical couplet clue. Would you like to join Eric and try to win a prize? It's a copy of Sherlock Holmes and the Empire Builders. Get ready. The cigarettes were by Ionides. Holmes settled this one with the utmost ease. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If your answer is among all of the correct ones and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. Goodness, I haven't gotten tongue-tied on that one in quite a while. It happens. It happens.
Yeah, it does.
Great. Well, this is, as always, a lovely way to round out January with you, the Earth's longest month, I think.
Has to do with the rotation of the Earth, I believe, sir.
Yeah. It's still dark. It's 31 days. It's the new year. It's all kinds of things.
It is all kinds of things.
I couldn't imagine spending it with a more delightful individual.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. What a limited acquaintanceship you must have with people. But I'm happy. If I can fill that small role, I'm happy.
Well,
if I can sing those songs, as Jolson said, as I could sing those popular songs, then I'm happy.
Well, this is the always happy Scott Monty.
And I'm the perpetually cheerful Burt Wolder.
And together, we say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.